tribute to Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And as people are coming in, you are each and every one of you welcome. And we are going to have somewhat of a bohemian Zoom meeting. And I have myself, my name is Magnus Toren, and I'm the director of the Henry Miller Memorial Library in Big Sur that has some pretty deep connections to Lawrence Ferlinghetti, to City Lights over the years. And I'm very pleased to be here and to try to host as best as possible this gathering. We're going to have presenters. I think it'd be 8 or 9 presenters in total. And then the order of the presenters are going to be revealed as they come along, because we have some changes in the program. So it'll be pretty much a surprise for you when a presenter comes on. We will also not have the chat on during the readers. We may put on a chat so that we can communicate. There are so many people at this Zoom meeting that it'll be difficult to accommodate too much back and forth, I think. We'll see. And I want to start by saying that I have sort of a romantic notion here, and that is that I thought about what Lawrence would want if he was alive. If he had a party with 300 people like this, where would he want to be? And you know, I thought maybe he would want to be at City Lights. Maybe he would want to be at the Henry Miller Library on the lawn, or maybe he would be at the Wenceslas Square in Prague. I don't know, but then I thought absolutely the best place for us to imagine that we are all gathering is on Bixby Beach in Big Sur, a short walk from his cabin, where the ocean is completely flat on this day, and there's a crystal clear knife edge horizon, and the very, very small waves are lapping up to the sand, you know, coloring it dark and light, coloring it dark and light. That's kind of where I hope that we all can imagine that we are right now. And before I welcome the first presenter, also a couple of things about the connection between Ferlinghetti and the library and Henry Miller. Ferlinghetti and Miller didn't know each other that well. They had lots of connection, of course, but I have not much in our archives regarding their relationship. But I do have a little bit about his relationship to Emil White, the Henry Miller's friend that opened the library. I know Lawrence was visiting him many times in the 70s and 80s, and wrote a beautiful foreword to the book of presenting Emil's life. And then in '93, in the 90s, I had the chance of meeting Lawrence as he came to the library several times. And I know some of you have probably seen this or read this, but I want to share it anyway. We had a poetry slam at the library, and there were 200 poetry fans sitting on the lawn. And I was the scorekeeper this day. And suddenly I get a note in my hand from one of the young women who took care of the door. There was a $10 cover charge this day. And it said on the note, "Dear Magnus, I am up at the gate. I have no money for the cover charge. Can you come up and help me? Lawrence." So I looked up and I realized this is Lawrence Ferlinghetti coming to our poetry slam. And I ran up, of course, and I said, "Hey, Lawrence, we'll comp you." And he said, "Thanks." And so he stepped in, and as some of you have been to the library, you can imagine the little wooden path. And then he comes around the redwoods there, and he looks out over the sea of people and the stage. And of course, everyone turns around and looks at him. And there is this kind of quiet suddenly in all the audience. And then Lawrence, as I have learned, and I have also learned about reading from friends of his, he has a tremendous grace and humility in the way he speaks. So with that grace and humility, he bowed and he gave a little talk about poetry. And that was, of course, the best part of that whole poetry slam event. So memorable moment with Lawrence at the library. And I also thought, because we talk so much about Coney Island of the mind, And just because it is the phrase Coney Island of the Mind comes from Henry Miller's sort of surreal text called Into the Nightlife, which was published in Paris in 1936. So I'm just going to read the section of that piece where he mentions the Coney Island of the Mind. Suddenly I am at the seashore and no recollection of the train stopping, no remembrance of it departing even, just swept up on the shore of the ocean like a comet. Everything is sordid, shoddy, thin as pasteboard, a Coney Island of the mind. The amusement shacks are running full blast, the shelves full of chinaware and dolls stuffed with straw and alarm clocks and spittoons. Every shop has 3 balls over it and every game is a ball game. The Jews are walking around in Macintoshes. The Japs are smiling. The air is full of chopped onions and sizzling hamburgers. Jabber, jabber. And over it all, in a muffled roar, comes the steady hiss and boom of the breakers. A long, uninterrupted, adenoidal wheeze that spreads a clammy catarrh over the dirty shebang. Behind the pasteboard street front, the breakers are plowing up the night with luminous argent teeth. The clams are lying on their backs, squirting ozone from their anal orifices. In the oceanic night, steeplechase looks like a wintry beard. Everything is sliding and crumbling. Everything glitters, totters, teeters, and titters. So that's a short section from the Black Spring. And I wish again that we could have a little conversation back and forth, but the Zoom makes it difficult. So I think I'm simply going to introduce our first presenter, and also by saying that this whole thing really is about sharing what Lawrence has meant to you in whatever way that you feel is right. If that's a story or a poem or a song, we're looking forward to it all. And the first presenter
Magnus,
is
before we jump into that, could I just quickly just do a quick welcome for me and Peter to Lines Online. This is our, for those of you that have not been part of the series and those of you who have, Peter Surchuk and I, fellow poet, have been for the library co-hosting a virtual poetry series, Lines Online, since last August. And we've just had a wonderful collection of poets each month joining us. So for those of you that are new to this and are here to celebrate Lawrence, please check out online. You can go to the library website and see the amazing poets that have been here. And we encourage you to continue with the series. Our next will be in May. And so I just wanted to quickly mention that and add Peter's and my welcome to everyone who's here today. We're just thrilled to have so many people here for Lines Online celebration for Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
Thank you, Thank you, Laura. So this is a special edition of the Lines Online poetry series we've had. So I'm glad you reminded me of that. So the first presenter that I'm very happy to present is poet, writer, songwriter, producer, essayist, and community organizer. And she will also, I hope, present some about herself. And please welcome Joan Gelfand.
Thank you. Thanks so much. What an honor. What an honor. I'm going to read a poem that was based on 3 dreams that I had about Lawrence, and then I'll talk for a minute or two about how the poem came into being. And I'm going to time myself, so no fear. The poem is called The Ferlinghetti School of Poetics, and it starts with a little epigram by Edgar Allan Poe. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. Has 3 parts. 1, the dream within the dream within the dream. What is it, Ferlinghetti? Taking star turns in my dreams, strolling in front of cars, haunting alleyways, stairways, bars, beating moth-like, flitting through San Francisco's sex-fraught avenues in North Beach, where XXX marks art and nasty commerce collide, intersect Columbus, Telegraph Hill, Jack Kerouac Way. You are fog whispering in from the sea on another sunny day. There's a breathless hush on the freeway tonight. Beyond the ledges of concrete, restaurants fall into dreams with candlelight couples. Lost Alexandria still burns. Ferlinghetti's words sink, weighted on the business end of an invisible fishing line, dredging last night's dream to the surface, gasping for air, shivering like some catfish, eyes bulging, wet lake water dripping off its scales. The knife of memory slices open that dream, finds me on a haunted street, instructing a small boy. You have to go to the Ferlinghetti school. It's totally rad and completely cool. 2. Ferlinghetti makes an appearance. Phantom audience shouts, higher, higher, egg the poets on. After all, they're not on the wire. Higher, we spin the memory wheel until there's my father strolling through his own Coney Island. And there he is again, winning a goldfish. The clerk hands over fish circling in plastic bag. Big Daddy pretends it's all for the kids. He needed to win like that fish needed water. 3, the poet reconsiders. Is the skill of life just keeping on, all the gears oiled and the doors open? Even if the past keeps drowning and the knifed open dreamfish still swims around. In Dream Theater, Ferlinghetti arrives. Was it the regal, the royal, the Metreon? I rise to make room for he who started everything, got the wheel of poetry turning, broke open language, letters, vaporized, while he drifts, haunting my dreams. And just a little bit of a backstory in about a minute or two. I was always, of course, a fan of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and he inspired me to start writing poetry at a young age. And maybe about 10 years ago, I had a series of 3 dreams about him. And so I feel that we met on another plane. I met him in person, of course, over the years. Anyway, by the time the 3rd dream happened and I saw him in a movie theater in my dream, I thought I better do something with this, craft it into a poem. I submitted it to Poets 11, where our dear Jack Hirschman was our poet laureate emeritus. And I was one of the winners for my district. And I had no idea if the poem had legs. Well, it's been published 11 times in all kinds of journals and magazines and in Europe. And a filmmaker took it upon himself to make a 5-minute film. And if you can believe this, the film has shown in 20 international film festivals. And it's won prizes. And so I am so grateful. Lawrence visited me in my dreams. So thank you for him and for his life and inspiration and for being here and inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joan. Yeah, I like the idea of this in a sense, you know, this is what we all feel like doing something, but next person up is an old friend of mine. And I don't know how many years ago that we met, but it was in the context of Jack Kerouac, I'm sure. And it was in Monterey, and we have had many events at the library over the years. And many of you know him as the creator of the Kerouac Museum in San Francisco next door to City Lights. So please welcome Jerry Cimino.
Thank you, Magnus, Laura. There wouldn't be a Beat Museum were it not for Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I'm sitting upstairs right now where many of you've been, kind of turned this upstairs area into a little office for the time being. And Lawrence Ferlinghetti actually and truly changed my life. His poetry was the first poetry that I ever understood. And it happened for me in 1968. I know I'm dating myself. Those of you who are of a similar vintage as me may remember, 1968 was such a turbulent year. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot and killed, Bobby Kennedy shot and killed. There were riots in the street of America. The Russians were invading Czechoslovakia with tanks, riots in France. The Vietnam War was raging, and us 14-year-old boys were watching our older brothers go off to war. And into that mix, in the 8th grade, came an English teacher, Mr. Schneider. And he was reading to us in class, and I was kind of a goofball in class, and a friend of mine by the name of Dan Rambo and I were sitting in the last row. And Mr. Schneider got so ticked off at us because we weren't paying attention that he literally threw a book at us, honest to God. And it flew right over our heads and hit the curtains behind us with a big loud bang. And he looked at both of us and he says, if you two goofballs can't pay attention, maybe this is something that'll wake you up. And at that point, he read from us from Coney Island of the Mind. And he read number 5. Those of you who have read the book know there aren't any real titles, it's numbers. But you know the poem, sometime during eternity, some guys show up, and one of them who shows up real late is a kind of a carpenter from some square type place like Galilee. And he starts wailing and claiming he's hip as to who made heaven and earth, and that the cat who really laid it on us is his dad. And having gone to Catholic school in my earlier years, that flipped me out. How do you write about the crucifixion of Christ like that? It just really just shocked me. Well, I went off to high school, went off to college, started reading the Beats a few years later when I found that poem. I was 23, and I found that poem in Coney Island of the Mind in a local bookstore, and I bought it and brought it home. And that led me to Kerouac, it led me to Ginsberg, and here we are today, having moved from Baltimore to San Francisco because of this work. So it really did, have a heck of an impact on my life. I saw Lawrence many times over the years, various places. When he'd visit the East Coast, I'd make a point to go watch him speak or read. And then, but probably the best memory I have, Magnus, it was at the Henry Miller Library, that very day that you mentioned. I was there for that day. We took the Beat Museum on Wheels down to the Henry Miller Library. It was our maiden voyage, really. And so after Lawrence got you and you let him in graciously, he came over and was looking at the Beat Museum on Wheels, and we were talking. It's the first time I ever had a really good conversation with him. I'd met him at conferences, but there were always people around. But we were talking for quite a while inside the Beat Museum on Wheels, and he was with some friends, and I made the comment. I told him that story. I was in the 8th grade when I read Coney Island for the first time, and I was 14 years old. And he turns to a friend and he goes, "That's when I get all of them. They're all 14 years old when they find the poetry." So I thought that was pretty telling. That meant a lot to me, and to be there. Those are my stories, and thank you for helping and having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Yeah, you know what? I think Miller said exactly the same thing about Lawrence in one place. He said he's the first poet that I can really understand, is what Miller said. So next up would have been Habib, but he's not here yet. So another close friend of mine, actually in the neighborhood, is up next, and she can introduce herself, but she is one of the people that I have known for the longest time, since I came to the United States in 1977. So please welcome Dana Carnazzo. There.
There we go.
You're good now.
Hi. Hi,
Hi,
I'm
Dana.
Dana. I was Dana. Hi, nice to see all of you. Thank you for joining. I was Dana Godby back in those Bixby days. And I would say growing up in Bixby Canyon and Big Sur as a child is just a poem of its own. It's kind of raucous and dirty and wild and all sorts of exploration. And I loved when Lawrence and his kids were here because it meant people to play with. And we'd go down to Bixby Beach and we'd build little dams and things in the rocks of the creek right there under the bridge. And it was just such a delight to have other children in the canyon. And knowing someone as a little child, as you may know, children of rock stars do not find their parents to be rock stars, they're just parents. And what I liked about Lawrence, excuse me, is that he was very gentle. And I always thought first I thought he was very aloof, but I think that in reality, he was a little bit shy. And so it was just an interesting thing to have this person that I knew was a giant in the world of words, just be this quiet, calm, gentle, shy guy when he was with us in the canyon. But Lawrence brought all sorts of other things into my life. He brought his outhouse, where every beat, every writer, everyone who came through wrote the most interesting graffiti and poetry and naughty words. And us kids, if I had friends over, we would go and see Lawrence's outhouse. We'd walk down the little canyon road and see if anyone was around and sneak in there and giggle and tittle and tattle. And we just loved it. And another thing that Lawrence did for me is he made my donkey very famous. He put Alf the Sacred Burro. Jack Kerouac put Alf the Sacred Burro in his book, Big Sur. And it's really a wonderful thing to have a famous donkey. So he helped with that. Years later, in my teen years, when things were kind of wild, I got to spend some time with Gregory Corso, who also was here because of Lawrence. So all sorts of things happened because of Lawrence. And because of Lawrence and my father, Norman Godby, and a few other writers and bohemians, all of Bixby Canyon is preserved kind of forever. They all pitched in $500, and so they could buy a spot down there for a place to write and to think. And so it's still that way. It's never going to be overdeveloped. It will always be thinkers and writers and people working in restaurants and just good country people. So that's a huge thing that all those guys got together and made happen. So we can still walk down that beautiful little country road with the redwoods and the creek going by and the sycamores and crossing the creek a few times on rickety bridges and make it down to Bixby Beach where we can have our next generation of kids playing in the sand. And Lawrence helped make all that happen. So I really enjoyed being around him as a child. I don't think I ever knew him. And as a teenager in San Francisco in 1968, because I'm of the same ilk as the last person who spoke, I really got to impress my friends by saying I knew him. And we would go to City Lights and bask in that. So I want to thank you all for listening to my tale. Thank you, Magnus.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much, Dana. Yeah.
Magnus, I just want to let you know that Habib is here if you wanted to go back to the order.
Great. So I will then say welcome to Habib. Habib, I have never met Habib in person, but he is a good friend of mine from New York. His name is Peter Hale, and he runs the Ginsberg Trust. And it's Peter who introduced me to Habib. And I'm really glad that you are with us, Habib. It's in part because it's interesting to have an international ingredient in a program like this. And so, are you there, Habib? And please welcome Habib. Oops, I have to unmute. You have to unmute yourself. So and I'm going to ask you to unmute, and I think you can do it now, right? There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm very delighted to be here with you, and I would like to thank personally Magnus and
Habib, I think you're Habib. I think you're really low volume.
It's better just to talk like this.
They're better.
Is it better like this?
Yeah.
Without, okay. So yes, my experience with the beats goes back to high school, and that's not really far. So I'm talking about 2002, 2003, 2004. That was my high school years. And I discovered the beats in general, you know, when I was looking for some outlets to familiarize myself with new ways of looking at the world. And I'm talking about basically the revolutionary poets, people who were very important during the 60s and the 70s, who inspired real change in the arts. That's how I came to the beats. And I first of all read Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac, and then I came across Lawrence Ferlinghetti while reading Ginsberg's letters and Kerouac's letters. So that's how I discovered Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and I started to read him, and I was very much touched by the way he wrote, which was different from Allen Ginsberg. It was for me a different way, which sounded almost like a poetic, colloquial form of writing. And I read some of his own first books that I could get. And one of those was the Coney Island of the Mind. And I was just so much touched by it. And I thought I would translate some of his own poems later on for my own immediate milieu, for my entourage, high school students, and later on the university students in Agadir, my hometown in the south of Morocco, not actually south, but in the middle. Yeah, and then when I went to the university, I started to talk about the beats to my friends, to some of the students who were very much interested in changing the status quo of our own literary scene and cultural scene. And that fell within a very kind of tumultuous historical moment for me, because we were going through strikes, and it was during the Arab Spring, 2011, 2013. So I thought the beats were very much really relevant to our own situation. So I started then to put together an anthology of beat poetry that I published later on. So it took me like 3 years I read through different collections by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, by Ginsberg, by other poets, Amiri Baraka, people who frequented their own milieu and so on, entourage. And I always admired, Lawrence's poetry, which for me sounded very much close to the colloquial. It was easier to understand in a way, very sarcastic in so many different ways. And I think its own distinctive feature for me lies in its own possibility to be narrated. And I think the narrative aspect of it made it easier to transmit and to render in classical Arabic. You could just recite it to someone in the street and make them laugh. I remember I did this with his own poem, The Underwear. I remember I read it to a teacher just outside of a cafe here in the village where I teach, and he just couldn't stop laughing. And I said, what do you think if I read this to the students? He said, it would be, I don't know, but it's a different situation. But anyways, I'm very much touched by the beat legacy, by Lawrence Ferlinghetti's legacy. I am very much indebted to his own sense of seeing poetry and arts in general as insurgent art. This is what I believe in, and this is what I share with my own other teachers, around me here in Morocco, and by extension in other Arab, North African, Middle Eastern countries. Yes, I wish I met him when I was in San Francisco. I went for a stroll. I went up and had a look at different, books there. And I wish I just said, I wish to God maybe just Lawrence Ferlinghetti would appear here and just meet him in person, because he is a symbol for me. He's a symbol of everything that I'm aspiring to be in the 21st century. As a Moroccan poet, as an Amazigh Berber, native of North Africa, we believe in multiplicity, we believe in difference, we believe in culture exchange, we believe in making life easier and more integrating of other people, no matter what their gender, no matter what their sex, no matter what their religion. This is what we believe in, and this is common, a universal thing. And I thank very warmly, Lawrence Ferlinghetti's legacy, his own person, wherever he could be now, in our own universe somewhere. And I will for sure extend this to my own students, to my colleagues, to my generation, to my family, who have this anthology in to my parents and sisters in their house now. So thank you so much again for giving me this opportunity. I'm very honored to be invited amongst you here. I would also like to thank Jack Hirschman, who is also there. And I'm very much inspired by his poetry. And I hope one day we'll translate it into classical Arabic and include it in one of the anthologies or work on a whole book. Thank you so much, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. The beat keeps on. The beat lives on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Habib. And next person on now will be Jim Sampas. I hope you are here somewhere, and that there you are. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and okay. I think you're good now. Welcome, Jim.
Hey guys. I'm just going to turn this down here. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. It's just an honor. I'm a gigantic fan of Lawrence. I had the great privilege of meeting him on a few occasions. The first time I met him was at the commemorative in Lowell, Massachusetts, to my uncle Jack Kerouac, and he was so gracious to come across the country and do his readings, and he really made my Aunt Stella feel really comfortable and in that whole setting. And I think that after getting to know his work and getting to know the history behind Lawrence, I think, somebody said earlier that he kind of changed everything. In my view, he really did. I mean, when you look at it, even Jack, he had written, I mean, he had published Town and the City early on in 1950. But that novel, as a lot of people know and understand, didn't do so well. But Lawrence had the guts and the foresight to publish various poets, one of which was, of course, Allen. And I would argue if Howell had never been published, there wouldn't have been this whole, all the attention regarding these poets and writers. And Jack, I'm convinced, would never have, there wouldn't have been as much excitement about surrounding them and interest, that he wouldn't have had that second chance in having On the Road published, which he had written many years earlier. he was an incredibly kind man, and I worked with him on a few occasions. I worked with him on a Kerouac tribute in New York City that I helped the New York University on, wherein he read a Kerouac poem at the town hall in New York City for a Kerouac tribute. And then later he contributed to a Kerouac tribute record that I had produced. And then what ended up happening was the company that I worked with on the Kerouac tribute record, the head of the A&R, the guy who sort of decided what spoken word records would come out, and I were talking, and we said, you know, there's so many albums by Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, even. Now there had been some recordings of Lawrence earlier, but in the 50s and 60s, but nothing really had been done with his work. So I approached him, and he was very, very, very kind to agree to let us record an album of his work, which is Coney Island of the Mind. And then later on, I recorded with him Pictures of the Gone World. And I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with his reading, but what I'd like to do is take a moment, if this all works properly, to play a couple tracks from those two albums. The first is number 2 from Pictures of the Gone, well, part 2, I guess you would call it, of Pictures of the Gone World.
Just as I used to say, it's harder to get running on the same old rails too long. And then when the sly switch comes along, they miss the turn and burn up the wrong rail while the gay caboose goes flying and the steam engine driver don't recognize them new electric horns. And the aged run out on the rusty spur, which ends up in the dead grass, where the rusty tin cans and bed springs and old razor blades and moldy mattresses lie. And the rail breaks off dead right there. Ties go on a while, and the aged say to themselves, well, this must be the place we were supposed to lie down. And they do. While the bright saloon careens along the way on a high hilltop, its windows full of blue sky and lovers with flowers, their long hair streaming, and all of them laughing and waving and whispering to each other and looking out and wondering what that gray sound is.
And the second track is it was part 19 of Coney Island of the Mind.
In woods where many rivers run, among the unbent hills and fields of our childhood, where ricks and rainbows mixed in memory, although our fields were streets, I see again those myriad mornings rise, when every living thing cast its shadow in eternity. And all day long the light like early morning, with its sharp shadows shadowing me, hardly dreamed of, or hardly knew to think of this unshaved today, with its derisive brooks that rise above dry trees and call and cry and question nothing spring and thing.
So that gives you a sense of his readings. The other little story I'd like to tell is when we were doing, years later, I produced a film called One Fast Mover, I'm Gone, Kerouac's Big Sur. It was all about Big Sur. The other thing you have to understand about Lawrence, which was really endearing, is that he was also very opinionated. And he wasn't afraid of telling you, as you would imagine from his poetry, how honest he is, of giving his opinion. So we had a really big budget for this documentary, which was really, really lucky to put together. We had folks like Tom Waits and Sam Shepard and Patti Smith and many others. It was a very high-end documentary with a full theatrical film crew. So I asked him if it would be okay if we recorded or filmed up in his cabin. And he graciously said yes. He said, whatever you need. And then we asked him also if he would appear in the film, and he said, great, yes, I would absolutely love to. So try and imagine we're up at Big Sur. We have a full theatrical film crew. The DP was from Iron Man, and a whole group of people around, and we're shooting the first interview, and it's of Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And again, the documentary is about Big Sur. And the first question is, what do you think of Big Sur? And he says, well, I don't think it was his best book. and he talked about how, all the inaccuracies of it and everything. And then he slowly swung back around to how much he admired Kerouac and everything. And it worked out great. But it just is another testament to the honesty there. So anyway, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Jim. That reading was kind of like sitting at on the beach with a campfire, and Lawrence sitting kind of on the other side of the campfire reading. You could discern the words, but they were kind of going through the crackling of a fire. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our next participant here, and that is Jack Hirschman. Please welcome Jack, and I hope that you can, I'm asking you to unmute now, Jack, so you should have the ability to unmute in the lower left-hand corner there. There you are. Welcome, Jack.
Hello, folks. Great to be here with you all. I'm going to begin by reading a poem by Agneta Falk that she wrote some time ago about Lawrence, because she was going to read, but she has some pollen allergic in the eyes. So she asked me to read a poem. It's called Blue Eyes. For Lawrence Ferlinghetti. What blue eyes you have, the better to see with, the better to open the light and strew it gently into the streets. You don't have to be dead to be alive. You don't have to shout to be heard. And you don't. Into the Hall of Fame, you enter with humility and grace, and your chuckling at the absurdity of it all is what echoes deep inside us, whether from your brushstrokes or your pen. Now, Magnus asked me if I would say something personal, and in fact, I wrote an arcane some years ago, which I'm going to read now, which describes really my whole life with Lawrence. And then I'll read the elegy that I wrote after his death. The Ferlinghetti Arcane. 1. Caro compagno, let's see, how many years since we first touched base? 50, I believe, unless Alzheimer's already begun playing tricks on me. You'd come east early in 61, riding the crest of the beat wave Jack and Alan were out there drumming on as a new American poetry. But you'd already been international in both Atlantic and Pacific Ocean theaters, chasing submarines in the war, and after North Carolina U on the GI Bill, getting your PhD in Paris at the Sorbonne. That's one of the sin harmonics always reverberant between us. You, the consummate consonant and vowel uttered, and I, the same vowel at the end of the next syllable, but only an unsounded echo barely heard, still being in the university. You got your degree and got out of it early on, and I gotta hand it to you. You never did go back to Bourgeoisville, but stayed as independent as you could, creating the first paperback bookstore in the land, opening a bunch of doors so that the worlds of people could realize San Francisco as one of the most priceless cities on the planet, still a city small town, like a kid at a window somewhere dreamed of way back when. And of course, got into trouble with the law after you published Ginsberg's Howl, becoming an activist poet publisher in defense of language, your own poetic voice with its lilting whine of a drawl, distinctive in its way, memorable, and therefore inimitable. Ah, fratello, you should have been at those many tables in Vesuvio's, Specs, and the Cafe Trieste when your poet biographer, Neely Tchaikovsky, had us all doubling over, as you would have also, at his almost perfect, always slightly envious, but ever affectionate impersonation of you, because you already were a legend by the 70s, encircled by a transparent but unbreakable wall of image with a capital I, which only Jack and Alan otherwise possess. Populist in poem, paint, and motion, you critique my work for being too arcane and esoteric, while you stole from all the poets you loved, giving their phrases new context. A master husker of American corn, ironic deconstructivist of the rhythms of patriotic cliche, you had a dream and would not go gentle into that war zone. Even after I joined the Communist Labor Party in 1980, and you'd be chuckling, calling me Black Jack Stalinsky, till the Soviet Union fell under the US threats a decade later. L'Italia cominciava ad entrare nella nostra vita fisicamente e poeticamente. We kept that sin harmonic glyph of friendship intact through the additions of Artaud, the death of my son David, your populist manifesto, eruptions of Central American poetry that the Roque Dalton Cultural Brigade translated, which you published for that ongoing cause of liberation. If there were any brushes between us, they were paint, too. These last years, the millennial decade, when we become closer out of brotherly need in a time of great anti-Semitism against Salam Aleikum as well. And with Alan gone, who was a light, and I also imagine a heavy cargo for you, we know there's no God to judge or forgive us, There's only this singing to life, what comes from the human immensity of death. And that's why putting into the computer file of the Revolutionary Poets Brigade anthology, At Sea, the finest poem you've ever written, and you wrote it this very year at the age of 90, I have a sense of the greatness of the victory over time and despair and authentically true poetry embodies. So write on, young timer, you who opposed the wars in Vietnam, the Gulf, the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Write on, first baseman in your ninth decade, with legs still able to give my vodka leaden ones a run for the bases. Well, sure, because I ride my bicycle every day. To see you a few days ago in your Francisco Street flat after a bout with staph infection, who drilled you one in your heart socket when they were fitting a pacemaker in. Though the antibiotics made you tired, your complexion still rosy, and I know all you want to do is get up and go downstairs and drive to your China Basin studio where alone you never are. So, quarter shore, we'll give you one more standing, oh big guy. Quarter shore, let's sing the Bella Ciao, son of Carlo Ferlinghetti di Brescia e Clemence Albertine Mendez Monsanto, your Sephardic Jewish mother. Together, they gave you your mouth and fitted you with some terrific genes and prophesied pacemaker, pacemaker, or no pacemaker at all. Our boy will live till the raven turns white. Auguri, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, auguri. And this is the elegy that I wrote after the end of his life. The elegy, arcane in memory of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, for Elaine Katzenberger, who, as you know, won for the poems and paintings and the stands taken for causes in need of spreading the word. You, Papa List, anarchist, common nest for bred birds and black to fly into and out of. You've long been honored. And now that you belong to what ages are left in this holocaustic pandemic for us all, we know that your passing has left the world angelically filled with the light of all you've been. A fighter, but reticent, a righteous warrior, but gentle of spirit. That's why the night of the day you died, I was embraced by an angel who loved you so much, she kept you breathing by way of her own breathlessness and is now transfigured in the modesty she's brought to you, who first brought it to her, who can now show the world the glory of the book we all know, despite burial or cremation or any number of ways your death is described. The book, which is opened at the cover and into whose depths you are lain, not to be buried at all, but to be read and read and read.
Thank you, Jack Hirschman. Thank you for being here with us. Um, so next participant is going to be Steve Heilig. I hope Steve is here. Steve will introduce himself. And I hope you're here, Steve. Are you? There you are. And I'm going to make sure that you can unmute yourself. And I'm asking now, so you should be able to do it. There you are. Hi, Steve. Welcome.
Good day, everyone. Thanks a lot, Magnus, for putting me after Jack.
Oh, come on, Steve.
Okay, let's get real here. Let's start with this. A nice Italian one for Lawrence. So I'm actually going to come about this a little bit differently because my focus and my experience and my connection and friendship with Lawrence was more about really advocacy and activism than it was about poetry. I came to San Francisco in the early 1980s, finishing up training here at UCSF in public health and epidemiology and things like that. It was the explosion of the AIDS epidemic, et cetera. And of course, I already knew from my years at Cal as an undergrad, et cetera, all about Lawrence. I read his books, and anytime you came to San Francisco, which we'd come over the Bay, the first destination was City Lights Books in North Beach to wander around and try to soak that up. But I didn't really meet him until some years later. It's actually 30 years ago, 1991. I was involved in a very high-profile stunt to bring a medication called RU-486, which is the medication abortion pill, to the United States. And it was, the way we did it was to actually smuggle it into the country, make sure we got busted, and make sure that the new president, Bill Clinton, got his attention, and he pledged to bring it to America to make it, it was already judge safe and effective in Europe, so why not have it here for American women too? And, all over the news. I did Ted Koppel's show, as I say, Clinton was talking about it. It took years for that to work, but the really cool thing is sometime after that was happening, I had a postcard in the mail in my office, and it just said, "Dear Steve, I salute you, Ferlinghetti." And I thought, wow, what did I do? Did I write something I didn't know about or something? So I called the store and actually got him on the phone one day. I said, "Thanks for the card. What was that about?" And he goes, "Oh, of course, it was about that bringing reproductive rights and freedom to America." I said, "Well, that's very cool. I know your work. I would like to meet you." And he said, "Well, let's set it up." So sometime soon, I was over there. We started at Trieste. That was a little bit annoying because if you're in Trieste with Lawrence, every other person that comes in wants to talk with him, of course, and get autographs and salute him as well. So we went down the street to another cafe and talked at some length about all kinds of things. And at that point, I was starting to do a lot of book reviews for the San Francisco Chronicle. It was supposed to be focused on healthcare and things like that, but I started sneaking in poetry and other things. And one of them was, if you can see it, this wonderful book published by City Lights, Howl on Trial, The Battle for Free Expression. One of my very favorites. It's not by Lawrence per se, but it's about the whole trial. And it has a lot of transcripts in here of the trial itself and the coverage from then, from the 1950s. And some great excerpts of the letters when he and Allen Ginsberg were trying to publish the book and get it out. I'll just read a very brief one. This is from 1957, February. The book is coming out, but Lawrence writes, "Dear Allen, to hell with contracts. We will just tell them you have a standing agreement with me and you can give me anything you feel like giving me on reprints whenever you get back to the States and sit in poetry chairs in the hinterland city colleges of New York and et cetera, and are rich and famous and fat and effing your admirers and getting reprinted in all the anthologies. Until then, match. The loot should be yours, since as you say, I too am getting famous as your publisher." So they were actually already good friends. Everybody knows the legend about how how Lawrence heard him at the famous Six Gallery reading and said, when do I get the manuscript? Now, interestingly enough, when I think of Lawrence as an activist, I knew about his work with the ACLU, of course, who defended him during that trial. And then after Magnus invited me to do this just this week, my newsletter from the ACLU of Northern California arrived. And lo and behold, it says, in memoriam, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, 1919 to 2021. In February, we bid farewell to Lawrence Ferlinghetti, former poet laureate of San Francisco, owner of the fabled City Lights bookstore, and fearless defender of the First Amendment. In 1957, he partnered with the ACLU of Northern California to defend freedom of expression after he was arrested and prosecuted for publishing Allen Ginsberg's Howl. Ferlinghetti continued to partner with us, and challenge censorship in subsequent decades. In a 2007 manifesto, he wrote, "Paper may burn, but words will escape," a sentiment that he embodied as a protector of artists and as an artist himself. We remain forever grateful for his partnership and support. That book they reference, and that I think has already been referenced, Poetry as Insurgent Art. So I reviewed this for the Chronicle when it came out in 2007, and soon in the mail came this inscribed copy with what I later learned was one of his signature ways of inscribing a book, to draw his face on it there. So it's one of my treasure little books here. And next time I talked to him, I go, "What did you think of the review?" And he very tactfully said, "Thank you for not ignoring me." And I then told him that, and then he asked me, "Are you a poet yourself?" And I said, "No, not really. I entered one poetry contest in my whole life, and it was by Black Sparrow Press, the publisher of Charles Bukowski's work. John Martin was the publisher, and he asked me, or the only guideline for the contest was try to evoke the spirit of Charles Bukowski. So I quickly wrote out a poem after too much wine one night and sent it in, and lo and behold, won the thing. And one of the features of the poem was being in Kerouac Alley, and here comes the ghost of Bukowski, and we both had too much to drink, so we end up peeing on the side of City Lights books. So I showed it to Lawrence when I had that the next time I saw him, and he said, "Well, maybe you should have ignored me with that one." So a friend of ours is Peter Coyote, who many of you know as an actor and digger originally. And I really commend to you one thing you might like to see. We couldn't get him here, but he is now a Buddhist priest, in addition to many other things, actor and activist and movie star formerly. And he did about an 8-minute tribute to Lawrence on YouTube. So if you were just to do Coyote and Ferlinghetti on YouTube, you'll get it. It's quite moving because he pays tribute to, in fact, as I think Jerry said, discovering Ferlinghetti at age 14 and then coming to San Francisco, being inspired by him, being helped by him, and seeing him as somebody who, as Peter put it, had maintained a focus on truth and freedom his whole life and changed the world in some ways in that regard. Now, Peter doesn't use the word bodhisattva in this regard, and he knows Peter is now an ordained Zen priest, so he knows better than I. But that's kind of how I see Lawrence, as somebody who really put others' interests and other values ahead of his own. He probably could have done a lot better materially, but that wasn't his thing. He really did act as a servant to the muses of poetry, to the freedom of speech, and really, and some of you know, if you've ever been involved in bookstores, as a pioneer in independent bookselling, which is no easy path in life these days, and it never has been, really. So the last thing I want to do is, since Magnus said, evoke the fireplace in Big Sur, this wonderful book came out a couple years ago. It is Writing Across the Landscape, Travel Journals 1960 to 2010 by Ferlinghetti. Now, I looked through this Unfortunately, my copy is a review copy. It doesn't have an index in it. So I had to actually read the thing again and look through it. But there's a great short section here from September 1961 called the Big Sur Journal Above Bixby Canyon. So September 12. I'm up here in the golden fields at the top of Big Sur on one of the highest hills over the ocean. The long wheatgrass is gold yellow up here. Its tars blow in the wind. I sit cross-legged, naked under the hot sun. Homer the dog has made himself some shade under a bush. He is full of burrs and the flies bother him. He's panting. It's early afternoon, a high noon. Way down below, westward, the blue-gray sea fading into a vague horizon of clouds. A car creeps like an ant on the highway. I think I could wander this way the rest of my life. Small knapsack, sneakers, an old navy shirt, khaki pants, a small knife, a bottle opener, a nail clipper, a pencil, a pad, a book, all I have, and so off to India one day. The wind blows through me over the hills. September 14th. I sit in the lotus position naked and contemplate one stalk of long gold grass. It has maybe 24 barbed tares on it, all pointing and leaning in the same direction, from the direction of the wind they grew in. Yet when I turn it against the wind, the tares turn with it, now point into the wind. The habit of a lifetime is easily broken. Once the thing it stems from is forgotten, once one is freed from it. Revolt and you shall live. September 16th, stars out tonight, enormous, myriad traceries, webs, sad mute histories, wheeling by. All these suns gone down already at midnight. Universe itself, not there anymore, nothing up there, out there anywhere, all burned out, millions of lives years ago. Nothing left but the light of it now reaching me. In sleeping bag, staring up at nothing. I like small constellations best, like the Pleiades and the Delphinius. They wheel by, hours apart, but in the same place, both passing through the same frame of the overhang of my lean-to. And I dream I am making a book cover for a book of the story of my life, and dream the square open frame of stars as the cover. First with the Pleiades, then a still more distant and older, smaller, and stiller constellation I don't recognize. But bang, now comes great Orion over the dark trees, waving his great spangled belt, flashing light bulbs in it. I see dark things rushing across the country. And then September 17th, alone with myself, climbing by Pico Blanco, found no mescal on Mescal Ridge, walking over the high small firs, the dirt road full of deer tracks and horseshoe prints. Homer the dog chasing deer up the steep banks, barking, always frustrated. Coveys of quail flesh out through the trees, a hawk sails high over. Further on, in a dark redwood gulch, a bad blue jay scolds. A sign by a rancher's gate says, no trespassing, survivors will be prosecuted. It's the 60s. While I was walking from Bixby Canyon to Point Sur, a plane flew from New York to San Francisco. A satellite circled the Soviet Union. Another with a man in it shot into the cosmos and circled the earth and came back to report there was no God up there, as we suspect. So there's his Big Sur note from this book. I also looked for Henry Miller, and all he had to say about Henry Miller was right. Some other breed of man has won out. So I have great respect. Lawrence was a hero to me, and I drive around and I give out the bumper stickers that say, "Howl if you love city lights." Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. It was so good to hear from you. Let's see. We have next coming up. We have a person who has read for us in the Lines Online poetry series that we have done, and she's a San Francisco area poet and teacher. And please all welcome Judy Wells. And I'm going to do the same thing, Judy, to ask you to unmute yourself now. And welcome, Judy.
Hi. Thanks. Thank you, Magnus and Laura and Peter. I've been watching the Lines Online poetry series for a long time now, and I'm really happy to participate as a participant with this wonderful tribute to Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And with all the stellar presenters, I'm really enjoyed every single one of them. I am actually a Berkeley poet, and in going back again, I can go back further than some of you. In 1965, my Stanford boyfriend gave me my first full poetry book, which was, of course, Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Coney Island of the Mind. And he also gave me a gorgeous book of Chagall prints. But this book I still have. I don't have the boyfriend. New Directions paperback, $1. What a deal. 13th printing. I was a French major at Stanford, and I was enamored with poetry and art. And then I ventured to Berkeley and began to hear the beat poets. And this was so important, hearing poets. The professors that I had never really read poets aloud, Stevens or Eliot, even though they have wonderful sounds, but I never really heard the poems. So suddenly with Ferlinghetti, McClure, Ginsberg, and Snyder reciting their poems to packed audiences was just a revelation to me. And I was just in awe that poets could just stand up and recite and have wonderful experience conveying their poems to the audience. When I finally finished grad school in Berkeley, which took me years, I knew I would never be an academic poet. I wanted to be a feminist poet with a beat. I want to read one poem. I'm sure most of you know this book, Christopher Felver's wonderful black and white portraits of Ferlinghetti. And there are very few women in this book, but I happened to know one of them. She was a good friend of mine and still is. And name. Ferlinghetti paints Carla Kandinsky. Carla Kandinsky called to tell me Lawrence Ferlinghetti died. I already knew. Jack Foley had already sent out an email. Carla said, I can't believe Ferlinghetti was 101 years old. You know, I used to model for him at his studio. He painted a picture of me nude with a vacuum cleaner, called it Emily Dickinson vacuuming. I laughed. You're a lot more voluptuous than Emily Dickinson was, if my Dickinson genes are any testimony. I'm about as flat-chested as you can get and could probably fit into Emily Dickinson's tiny white house dress. She laughed and repeated again. I still can't believe he was 101. Mr. Blue Eyes, I said. I remember when he was 99. He was going to be 102 in March. There's a vigil tonight at City Lights, she said, but I know neither of us will be there. Rest in peace, dear poet. Later, I remember Christopher Felver's photographic book of Ferlinghetti portraits. And there's Carla in Lawrence Ferlinghetti's studio at Hunters Point in San Francisco, 1995. She's sitting in an easy chair covered with a Japanese cloth. Straw hat on her head, light drape around her shoulders, revealing voluptuous drooping breasts and stomach curves. She looks, well, she looks bored, or maybe just contemplative, thinking about her next poem, for she is, after all, a poet. Or maybe about her next cleaning job, for she is, after all, a house cleaner too. Or about the next apple pie she will bake for her lover. Lawrence's back is to us at his easel as he paints his model in her relaxed position. One arm flung over the back of her chair, one leg raised, supported by the armrest. I don't think his portrait of Carla is a very good resemblance, but there is something about the way he captures the tilt of her head, giving her that regal look of a sought-after artist's model, for she has, after all, been painted by all the Bay Area greats. Maybe by now, Carla would just like to get out of her relaxed position and stretch, for isn't that a timer sitting at her feet to declare her break? On the page opposite Lawrence painting Carla is a face-on portrait of Ferlinghetti at the D. Young Museum, 1996. Riley pinching his lapel button. Fuck art. Let's dance. Thank you. And oops. I wanted to just read finally one of Ferlinghetti's poems because it's about art. And as I said, I admired that he was also a painter. This is number 14 from Coney Island of the Mind. Don't let that horse eat that violin, cried Chagall's mother. But he kept right on painting and became famous and kept on painting the horse with violin in mouth. And when he finally finished it, he jumped up upon the horse and rode away, waving the violin. And then, with a low bow, gave it to the first naked nude he ran across, and there were no strings attached. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Next up will be Ben Gibbard. Ben, are you there?
You froze and I didn't hear the intro, so I didn't know.
I just said, here is Ben.
And here I am.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And here you are.
And here I am. Thank you for having me, everybody. It's been really awesome to hear all these stories and readings of Lawrence's and about Lawrence. I came about his work, as I'm sure many people have, in a used bookstore in my college town of Bellingham, Washington, where I picked up this little number, and it's not an understatement to say that it really changed my life, and really gave me, as Jerry mentioned earlier, was one of the first poets that I really understood, that I really got, that really spoke to me in a very clear and concise but very eloquent language. And I got to meet him once. I was able to go visit him at his studio to look at some of his paintings, and I remember he was in the corner, and he was very lovely and very welcoming to me. And but I found it rather odd that he had opened up his studio, and I was literally just pawing through a lifetime worth of work, and in the midst of the artist himself. And I at some point turned around to him and said, Lawrence, this would be as if you came to my studio and I just played you hundreds of songs and asked you to tell me which one you wanted. And his response was just kind of a shrug and like, yeah, well, this is how it works. Getting a chance to spend even a couple hours with him was to this day one of the highlight of my life, honestly, because he meant so much to me. So I'm gonna play a song for you guys that I wrote while in Bixby Canyon at at the first cabin that I guess he owned down there, one of them. So here goes. The song's called "I'm Building a Fire." Building a fire to keep you warm long after I retire. This body is bound to expire tonight. Tonight. Embers aglow remind you what you already know, that the night is only a temporary absence of light. Of light. Of light, of light. Morning you'll wake, the ashes of a memory in the sun on your face that will not seem so far away. Arise, you're alive. Arise. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks to Laura and Magnus for inviting me to be here, and I'm excited to check out the rest of the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. I think I didn't hear what happened there. My screen froze again. Did it freeze for everyone, or is it just me?
I think it was just you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ben. That was fantastic. So glad that you could make it and be with us. You know, it's 5:30, a little past 5:30, and we said an hour and a half that we were going to be together for an hour and a half, and that's what we've done now. So I'm wondering whether we should wrap it up. I have one more thing I'd like to talk about, and then show a two-minute long slideshow, basically images that some of you already know. Some of them you have not seen, and they're not very many, but it's only 2 minutes long. But before that, what do you think, Laura? Is that an okay plan?
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And of course, thanks to all of you who came and all of the presenters. One thing that happened in the planning for this was I asked a good friend of mine, Maya, who were with Lawrence in Prague in 1988. And we tried to get some of the personal memories from the folks who were with Lawrence in Prague. In Prague, it was very, very important for the people of the Czech Republic at the time to have him come there. And I received a few letters, but I just want to extract a few things. So there was a book fair, and the guest of honor at the book fair was Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And the final event of the fair was the presentation to Lawrence of a scroll 23 feet long, with over 400 photos of people in all walks of life who had read their favorite lines of his poetry in the non-stop Ferlinghetti 24/7 event that had been held all through the 3 days and nights before. The scroll was presented to Lawrence by Marta Kubishova, the very much loved singer of the former underground anthem for freedom. And the crowd went wild. I know some of you know about this already. And the beautiful thing about Marta Kubisova is that she sang in 1968, when the result of the uprising was tragic for many, and then again in 1989 and so on, where things became much better. Ferlinghetti was a symbol, and in fact it says from one of the organizers, his name is Serp, and he told my friend Maya that Ferlinghetti gave us the courage to survive. So it's a very, and one of the people who organized it sent me a letter, and again, it's too long to read, but I'd like to just share the last part of it. So one story on the end, in the mid-80s, my friend met in Prague on the Charles's Bridge a boy from San Francisco. To meet an American here at that time wasn't so ordinary. She brought him to the campus, and we asked him if he knew Ferlinghetti. He didn't know him. He didn't know Beats, City Lights. And when he heard the word hippie, he sneered. It was a shock for us. So we took him to the North Bohemia, still very forgotten part of the country, where we had paid very low rent for the almost rundown farmstead for our different actions. Sure, we were under police supervision, and we took him on the typical Czech country dance party, which meant the rock band playing mostly, playing mostly Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, mainly long-haired men and women, drunken, vomiting, shouting, and doing many private things publicly. Our American was a curiosity immediately, but he was very surprised that many of these people knew Beat Generation, including Ferlinghetti. In the opposite, we were very surprised when he told us that in the United States, in the country of freedom for us, the action like this would have been stopped in 5 minutes. After some time, he sent a letter to us, back to us, and said he had visited the City Lights bookstore and that it was so amazing. So a very funny, strange cultural exchange. Good luck, says Lubor Snisek, and he wrote this to us just yesterday. So I am going to then thank you again and share the screen and show this little slideshow. And the music to it is in fact part of Molitva pro Marti, which is the song by Marta Kubisova that became a legendary song for the freedom, people who strive for freedom in Czech. And she's called the Angel of Freedom for all the people who are risking their lives to achieve democracy. And then there is a section at the end with music from Lars-Erik Larsson, and it's called A God Disguised.
Ať mír dál zůstává s touto krajinou. Zloba, závist, zášť, strach a svár, ty ať pominou, ať už pominou. Teď, když tvá ztracená vláda věcí tvých zpět se k tobě navrátí, lidé navrátí. Z oblohy mrak zvolna odplouvá a každý sklízí setvu svou.